Why did the colonel smile when he said she wouldn't last? From the office window of Fortitude Base, Colonel Marcus Thorne watched the transport bus hiss to a stop in the frozen dawn. The brakes released a long, tired sigh into the thin mountain air, and one figure stepped down onto the gravel. A woman. Her name was Captain Anna Voronova, a name pulled from a file that felt too light, too tidy. Paperwork and spreadsheets, neat little reports, a string of logistical postings that suggested she belonged in fluorescent offices, not in the shadow of the jagged peaks that carved into the sky. Thorne's lip curled. This place was not made for staff officers. It was where hardened infantrymen came to be broken down and rebuilt if they survived long enough. The mountain was merciless, the altitude a blade at the lungs, the cold a constant enemy. This base was a crucible, and from the window the colonel saw nothing but fragility in the slender figure adjusting a duffel on her shoulder. "She won't last," he muttered, almost pleased with the verdict. Beside him, Sergeant Major Vance stood silent, hands clasped behind his back. His face gave nothing away. He had learned long ago that it was best to reserve judgment. Men and women arrived at Fortitude carrying bravado, fear, or silence. Some cracked in days, others endured. But sometimes a quiet one revealed depths no one expected. Vance's eyes followed the captain as she walked toward the administrative building. Straight posture, steady pace. Not hurried, not hesitant. Just moving. Thorne had already dismissed her. Vance wasn't so sure. Anna felt the eyes on her. The soldiers lounging near the barracks didn't bother to hide their stares. Some smirked, others shook their heads. She caught fragments of whispers, a new officer, a woman, a stranger. She didn't respond. Her attention was narrowed, as it always had been, to the mechanics of movement. One foot, then the other, the rhythm of breath in thin air. She marked the sound of the generator in the distance, the direction of the wind, the position of the watchtowers. A habit ingrained from another life. When she finally stood before Colonel Thorne's desk, he didn't offer her a chair. The mountains behind him filled the window, jagged, merciless, a deliberate backdrop to his authority. "Captain Voronova," he said, drawing out her name as if testing it for flaws. "Your record is tidy." The word was an insult. He leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Logistics, procurement, administrative oversight, impressive enough behind a desk, I'm sure, but let's be clear, we don't fight wars with spreadsheets up here. This is an elite training ground, a place where my officers lead from the front. The demands are extreme. I doubt your background has prepared you. He was baiting her, testing for cracks. Anna's face was calm. Her gray eyes did not waver. "I will meet the standard, Colonel." Thorne's laugh was sharp, cutting. "The standard is what keeps you from being carried out in a medevac. My officers exceed it. Can you even keep up?" His gaze dropped deliberately to her frame, her immaculate uniform, her lean build that looked fragile against the iron of the mountain. Her answer was only two words: "I can." No arrogance, no plea, just fact. It irritated him more than defiance would have. He waved a hand, dismissing her. "We'll see. Conditioning run tomorrow, 0600, full kit, don't be late." As she left, she heard him murmur to Vance, loud enough for the words to reach her. "A week, that's what I give her." She didn't flinch. The judgment meant nothing. She had been written off by men like him before. They only ever saw the file, the surface, the pieces of history left deliberately untouched. What they never asked was what had been hidden in the silence between the lines. The first 2 days were quiet isolation. She moved through the base like a ghost, unpacking her few belongings with methodical care. Uniforms aligned, boots squared, a single book on the nightstand. She ate alone at the corner of the mess hall, eyes scanning the room with that same subtle assessment, not curiosity but mapping. Hierarchies revealed themselves in body language, in where each group sat. Cocky young lieutenants at one table, watchful sergeants at another. She studied the maps on the wall more than she studied faces, her mind tracing terrain lines and memorizing routes while the others laughed and jeered. Some whispered, "Pencil pusher, desk captain." She ignored them. When a young private struggled with his gear in the corridor, rations and ammunition spilling onto the ground, she stopped only long enough to point. "Your weight is unbalanced. Shift your water to the center. Dense items evenly distributed. It will feel 10 pounds lighter." She left before he could respond, the soldier staring after her as if she had revealed a small piece of sorcery. Even then, no one truly saw her. Not yet. But dawn was coming. The announcement crackled over the PA system with cruel cheer. Colonel Thorne's voice. "Attention all personnel. Mandatory conditioning run. 0600 hours. Full combat gear. Omega Ridge Loop. See you at the finish line." Groans rippled through the barracks. Omega Ridge was infamous. 5 miles. Nearly 2,000 feet of elevation gain, treacherous footing, all at over 10,000 feet. To attempt it in full kit was less training than punishment. Soldiers muttered curses. Some laughed nervously. Anna prepared in silence. Her pack was already balanced, her rifle secured, her helmet snug. Before the start, she closed her eyes, drawing in steady, measured breaths. She regulated her heart rate, forcing her body into calm efficiency. Around her, the others stretched, joked, or masked dread with bravado. She stood apart, still, almost small in her gear. Sergeant Major Vance noticed a quiet solidity in her stance, like a stone lodged deep in the earth. The run began with chaos. The younger men sprinted, eager to impress, burning themselves out in minutes. Altitude punished every overstep. Chests heaved, faces flushed, some staggered and fell. The trail climbed without mercy, and already the unit fractured, strong pushing ahead, weak falling behind. Thorne watched from the ridge, convinced this was where she would break. Anna started near the back. No sprint, no drama, just a steady cadence as if she were walking on flat ground. Her breath was inaudible, her stride exact. At first, no one noticed. Then she began to pass the stragglers, one by one, quietly. She came upon Private Tanaka collapsed against a rock, gasping in panic. "Breathe with me," she told him, not slowing. "Through your nose, 4 counts in. Hold out for 6. Match my rhythm." Her voice was even, steady, a metronome against his fear. Slowly, his breathing calmed. His panic bled away. She left him with the rhythm, continuing her relentless climb. And then she passed the others. Fire teams, sergeants, lieutenants, red-faced and humbled. She didn't accelerate, she simply didn't falter. The soldiers began to hear it before they saw it, the steady crunch of gravel behind them, a rhythm untouched by strain. And then she was there, passing, impassive, eyes fixed forward. A machine. A shadow that didn't belong to the mountain but moved with it. By the time the summit leveled out, she had overtaken them all. Even the reconnaissance specialists, the fittest men on the base, were left behind, disbelief on their faces. Anna crossed the finish line alone. Thorne checked his watch, disbelieving. She wasn't gasping. She wasn't broken. Only a sheen of sweat touched her temples. She unslung her rifle, placed it on the ground, and began stretching with the calm of someone finishing a casual jog. 10 minutes later, the others stumbled across in ragged groups, collapsing, vomiting, swearing. Each of them looked at her, the paper pusher, the desk officer, standing tall, unshaken, as if she could do it again. That night when she entered the mess hall, the usual conversation fell to silence. Not mockery this time, something else. Awe, fear, respect. And then the whispers began again, but they were different now. She passed me like I was standing still. She helped Tanaka breathe. She didn't even break a sweat. Anna sat at her usual table, alone, but not ignored. Private Tanaka, still pale but determined, approached with his tray rattling in nervous hands. "Ma'am, is this seat taken?" She looked up, gray eyes unreadable, a single nod. The first crack in the wall of isolation. Sergeant Major Vance watched, silent, knowing. The mountain had not broken her. Something else was breaking instead. The silence. Why didn't she protest when they sidelined her? The orders came quietly, passed through Sergeant Major Vance with the same tone as an afterthought. Captain Voronova would not lead, not train, not even advise. She would observe, take notes, evaluate 3rd Platoon during their upcoming field exercise. A role meant for an outsider, a role designed to keep her out of the way. She accepted it with no visible reaction, understood, that was all. But Vance saw something in her eyes as she walked away. Not disappointment, not resentment, something colder, patience. The kind a predator carried when it knew the hunt would come to it. Colonel Thorne, on the other hand, seethed. His attempt to humiliate her on Omega Ridge had failed spectacularly. Not only had she endured, she had surpassed every man under his command, shattered records, and done it without a single show of strain. And worse, she had gained their attention. The whispers in the mess hall had turned. The young private she had guided on the ridge now sat beside her at meals, no longer afraid. Others hovered nearby, cautious, asking questions in halting tones. About gear. About breathing, about endurance. She gave them facts, never stories. But even facts carry weight when they come from someone who has done the impossible. It infuriated Thorne. He stared at her file late into the night, flipping through the thin pages as if the paper itself might yield some hidden truth. But all he found was the same sterile record: logistics, administration, procurement, a career of desks and ledgers. None of it explained the woman who had moved like a ghost up Omega Ridge. It made no sense, unless the file was a lie. The storm hit 2 nights into the exercise. It began as light snow drifting across the ridges. Nothing unusual, nothing the men weren't trained to handle. But the sky changed too fast. The clouds thickened into a bruised, swollen ceiling pressing low. The wind rose with a howl that stripped heat from the skin in seconds. Then came the white wall, a blizzard so dense it erased the world. Visibility fell to 0. Tents snapped and tore. Voices disappeared in the roar. In the command center, the map lit up with trackers from each unit. All steady, all accounted for, except one, 3rd Platoon. Their signal had vanished. Static screamed through the radio until, for a moment, a desperate voice broke through. Lieutenant Davies. Visibility 0, 1 man down, possible fracture, GPS out, requesting. Then nothing. The room filled with panic. Suggestions collided. Send a drone. Launch a rescue team. Wait out the storm. Thorne shouted them all down. It's suicide out there. Protocol is to hold position. They'll have to ride it out. But protocol meant death. Men freezing in the dark while the storm ate through their resolve. That was when the room went silent. She was standing in the doorway, snow still clinging to her uniform. Captain Voronova, calm, colder than the storm outside. "I know where they are," she said. Every head turned, even Thorne, his face pale with disbelief. "You what?" "I know where they are." She walked to the map on the wall, the same one she had studied alone in the mess hall. Her gloved finger traced the ridgelines. Davies was heading toward Checkpoint Zulu when they lost signal. Standard procedure with an injured man is to find immediate shelter. With the wind from the northeast, they'd be driven southwest. Here, she tapped the map. Granite overhangs, Old Shepherd's Shelter. It's not on the military charts, but it's there. Thorne's jaw clenched. That's a guess, a blind guess. No, her voice was quiet, clinical. It's a tactical assessment, terrain, weather, the psychology of a young officer under duress. He would choose the most logical path. The shelter is their only chance. The colonel's face darkened, rage twisting against something else creeping into his gut. Fear. "And what makes you an expert, Captain?" His voice trembled with contained fury. "You're a logistician, a staff officer, not survival, not operations, logistics. What qualifies you to?" Her eyes lifted to him, steady, unflinching, a shade of gray that could freeze blood. "My specialization, Colonel," she said, her voice dropping low, "was deep cover operations and unconventional extraction, often in Arctic and high-altitude environments." The words fell into the room like a grenade. No one moved. Thorne's mouth went dry. He whispered, "Who are you?" Anna turned from him, already done with the conversation. "Sergeant Major," she said to Vance, "I need 4 volunteers, snowmobiles, medical kits, and thermal gear. We leave in 20 minutes. Vance didn't look at Thorne for permission. "I'm one," he said. Then, turning to the room, "Tanaka, you're coming, 2 more." The young private stood immediately, fear on his face but conviction in his spine. Thorne staggered back toward his desk. His voice rasped as he barked at an aide. "Get me her sealed file. Now, Alpha 9 Omega clearance." But Anna was already outside, her hands moving with precise efficiency over the snowmobiles. Straps tightened, fuel checked, weapons secured. She worked as if she had done this 100 times before. Inside, Thorne opened the red-bordered folder the aide placed in his hands. Page after page of black lines. Redactions, but enough remained. Commendations for valor in denied territories. Citations from Allied special units. And then one word that froze the colonel's breath. Project Cerberus. A unit whispered in rumor. A ghost story told to frighten recruits. Operatives who disappeared into the worst places in the world and came back with the impossible, or didn't come back at all. Her call sign was written in stark, chilling clarity. Cassandra. The ghost of the North. Thorne looked out the window at the woman adjusting her thermal helmet in the swirling snow. He had not been sent a paper pusher. He had been sent a weapon, and he had mocked her as a clerk. Anna led the team into the white void. She did not look at instruments. She felt the wind on her cheek, the slope of the unseen ground beneath the tracks, the invisible pull of the mountain's contours she had already memorized. Vance followed behind her, his decades of experience screaming that this was madness. Yet he trusted her, completely. Tanaka clung to his machine, terrified, but his fear was tempered by something else, faith. He had seen her pass him on the ridge. He had felt her voice anchor him when he was drowning in panic. If anyone could find the lost platoon, it was her. Hours passed in the howling dark. Then through the curtain of snow, Anna raised a hand. They stopped. Ahead, beneath a granite overhang, a faint shape emerged. A crude snow cave dug in desperation. Figures huddled together. 3rd Platoon. Alive. The injured soldier's leg was splinted with sticks, his face white with pain, but he breathed. Lieutenant Davies stared at her with wide, broken eyes. How did you?" Anna didn't answer. She was already moving, already directing the others. Blankets, heat packs, rations. Her commands were short, exact, mercilessly efficient. She treated fear like it didn't exist. When they turned back toward the base, the storm still raged, but Anna cut the way like she had been born in blizzards. Slow, grueling, pulling the sled with the wounded man. Her team followed her line without hesitation. Dawn broke pale and gray as the outline of Fortitude Base appeared through the thinning snow. And there, waiting, was a crowd. Not just officers, not just soldiers, everyone, mechanics, cooks, men and women wrapped in coats waiting in the cold. Word had traveled. The paper pusher had gone into the storm. She had come back with the lost. At the front stood Colonel Thorne. His face was ashen, unreadable. Anna stopped her snowmobile, dismounted, and began walking toward him. The crowd did not move. And then, something no one expected. The colonel raised his hand. A slow, deliberate, perfect salute, not the perfunctory gesture of rank, but the salute of a soldier to a superior, a gesture of respect that words could never carry. One by one, the others followed. Vance, Davies leaning on another man. Then the entire crowd, a sea of salutes, not to the captain who had arrived as an outsider, but to the savior who had led them through the storm. Anna held the salute crisp, precise, her face impassive. For a heartbeat, the mountain itself seemed to hold still. The officer had said she wouldn't last. The officer had been wrong. Why did they salute her like she outranked them all? A week had passed since the blizzard, but the echoes of that morning still hung in the air. Fortitude Base, once filled with whispers and doubt, now carried her name like a quiet legend. Voronova, the woman who had gone into the storm and returned with the lost. Something had shifted in the rhythm of the place. It wasn't spoken, but it was felt. In the way soldiers straightened when she entered a room, in the way conversations hushed when she passed, in the way no one laughed at the paper pusher anymore. They didn't joke, they didn't jeer. They gave her distance, not out of disdain but reverence. She hadn't asked for it. She didn't even seem to notice it. Her routine remained the same: solitary meals, quiet walks along the perimeter, methodical training. If the base now bent itself around her presence, she adapted as if it had always been so. But the truth was impossible to hide. She was no longer the outsider. She was the standard. Colonel Thorne knew it, and it burned him. In the privacy of his office, he stared again at her sealed file, the black bars hiding more than they revealed. Project Cerberus. Cassandra. He had thought it myth. Now it sat in his desk drawer like a silent accusation. He remembered his words, "She won't last a week." He had said it with smug certainty. Now every soldier in the base remembered it too. The colonel who doubted, the colonel who was wrong. He carried that shame like frostbite. It gnawed at him, sleepless nights where the storm replayed in his mind. She had seen what he hadn't, done what he wouldn't, and in her silence she had condemned him louder than any insult could. But Anna carried no triumph. She moved through the days untouched by the politics swirling around her. Her face gave nothing away. Only once did something slip. At dawn, out on the rifle range, she lay prone with her weapon steady, breathing slow. Her shots cracked like thunder, each one deliberate, each one perfect. Private Tanaka appeared at her side, awkward, hesitant, unsure if he was intruding. He didn't speak. He just lay down on the lane next to hers and mirrored her posture, fumbling to copy her stillness. He wasn't seeking conversation. He was seeking discipline, seeking to learn by imitation. Anna's eyes flicked to him once. She gave no instruction. She didn't need to. She knew he would watch, copy, fail, and try again. It was the purest form of respect, silence as a bond. Sergeant Major Vance passed by on inspection. He paused, watching the two figures on the range, the living legend and the young private lying beside her. He caught Anna's eye. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He returned it, two professionals recognizing what was happening. Mentorship without words. The soldiers began to follow her in other ways. They watched her movements on long marches, imitated her breathing techniques, copied how she distributed her gear. Small details, details that mattered. She never instructed. She never asked for attention. They gave it anyway. But not everyone was comfortable with the shift. Colonel Thorne felt his authority slipping, a weight pressing against him every time a soldier looked at her instead of him. They didn't disobey, but the subtle gravity of respect had shifted. He could feel it in the air of the command room, in the mess hall, in the silence when she walked by. She had not challenged him openly. She had not sought to undermine him. That made it worse. The quietness of her presence eroded his command like water carving stone. He needed to reassert himself, needed to prove, if only to himself, that he was still in control. So he gave her responsibility. Not a desk assignment, not an observer role, something real. Oversight of all high-risk training. Every live-fire exercise, every long-range navigation, every survival drill. Her recommendations were to be considered final. He told himself it was pragmatic. She had proven herself. She had knowledge no one else did. But deep down, he knew it was an act of surrender disguised as authority. Anna accepted with the same even tone as always. Understood. The weeks bled into a new rhythm. Soldiers who had once dismissed her now studied her. They sought her input in small, careful ways. A question about altitude acclimatization. A quiet request about gear balance. An unspoken hope for acknowledgement. She gave them what they asked for, never more. Facts, methods, tools, but never herself. It was Tanaka who tried hardest to bridge that distance. Young, earnest, still raw from his near collapse on the ridge, he trailed her in ways he barely understood, carrying her methods into his own routines, copying her discipline. She never encouraged it, but she never pushed him away either. One night after a grueling mountain navigation drill, he lingered outside the barracks, waiting as she walked past. Snow crunched under her boots. His voice was uncertain. "Ma'am, how do you stay calm when it feels like everything is falling apart?" She stopped, breath steaming in the night air. Her eyes lingered on him, gray and unreadable. "Calm is not a feeling," she said. "It's a choice. Panic is noise, you silence it, one breath at a time." Then she walked on, leaving him rooted in the snow, replaying her words again and again. Inside the command building, Colonel Thorne watched through the window. He saw the private's awe, the way Anna's presence held weight heavier than his own words ever did. He clenched his fists, shame and fury boiling together. Vance entered the office quietly, reports in hand. Thorne turned on him, voice sharp. "Do you see it, Elias? Do you see what she's doing? They look at her like she's their commanding officer, like she." "She earned it," Vance interrupted softly. Thorne's jaw tightened. He turned away, staring at the dark mountains beyond the glass. He wanted to argue, to reassert control, but the words withered in his throat. Out on the frozen range, Anna exhaled slowly. Another shot cracked. Brass fell softly onto snow, perfect again. The soldiers called her Captain Voronova. But quietly, in whispers carried through the barracks at night, they began to call her something else. Cassandra. They didn't know why. They didn't know where it came from, but the name carried through the halls like a shadow. And Anna, she did not correct them. Why did she never speak of where she'd learned it all? Weeks after the storm rescue, Anna Voronova had become a presence that could not be ignored. Fortitude Base had always been a place of noise, laughter in the mess, arguments in the gym, curses on the trail. But when she entered, silence seemed to follow. Not awkward, not hostile, reverent. Soldiers held their words back, not because they feared her, but because they didn't want to waste them. She had not asked for their respect. She had not earned it with speeches or charisma. She had earned it with something sharper, with silence, with proof. Every morning she was on the range before first light. Every evening she walked the perimeter while others played cards or traded stories. And in between, she observed every drill, every exercise, every flaw. She never barked at the men, never humiliated anyone. She simply pointed out what they missed, and once they saw it through her eyes, they never forgot it again. Like when a squad was practicing fire and maneuver drills in the snow, their spacing was textbook, their timing was good, but Anna's voice cut in calm, precise. "Your angles are wrong." The lieutenant in charge bristled. "Ma'am, we're within doctrine." "Doctrine doesn't stop bullets, just 5 degrees left, now." He obeyed, grudging. A second later, she pointed to the snowbank behind them. "That angle would have left you exposed there. To anyone patient enough to wait, 5 degrees is the difference between cover and a body bag." No one argued after that. But what unsettled them most wasn't her accuracy. It was the way she said it. Not like she'd studied it in a manual, like she had lived it. Private Tanaka noticed it more than anyone. He had made a habit of shadowing her when he could, not close enough to intrude, but always within reach of her silence. He studied her movements, her precision, her breathing. She let him. One night, when the barracks were quiet and the wind clawed at the walls, Tanaka asked her the question that had gnawed at him. "Ma'am, where did you learn all this?" Anna looked at him for a long moment, her gray eyes steady, unreadable. Then she said only, "Not here." It wasn't an answer, it was a wall. Tanaka nodded, swallowing his curiosity. But the question stayed, echoing in him even as he drifted into uneasy sleep. Others wondered too. She carried no insignia beyond her rank. No ribbons, no medals displayed. Her file was an enigma, and Thorne's authority could not explain her presence. Men whispered. Some claimed she had been special forces, others that she had trained with mountain units abroad. No one knew. The truth was sealed behind black lines on paper. But the mountain did not care about files or rumors. The mountain revealed truth in blood and bone. The next exercise proved it. It was a live-fire navigation drill through the southern ridges, known for their treacherous gullies and sudden drops. Each squad was tasked with maneuvering under pressure, advancing through mock ambush zones and maintaining cohesion. The terrain was vicious, jagged rock hidden under shifting snow, icy ledges waiting to snap an ankle or worse. Anna accompanied 3rd Platoon again. Officially, she was there to observe. Unofficially, every man in the squad watched her more than they watched the lieutenant. The ambush came as expected. Machine gun blanks rattling from the ridge line, smoke grenades cutting sightlines, simulated casualties screaming. Chaos erupted, men diving for cover, rifles firing back into the smoke. Anna didn't flinch. She moved through it with unnerving calm, her stride precise, her weapon steady though she wasn't even firing. She adjusted positions with a glance, her voice low but unyielding. Closer spacing. Cover your angle. Check your sector. The men responded instinctively. Her presence was gravity, their panic bent around her calm. At one point, Tanaka tripped on the uneven snow, his rifle slipping from numb fingers. He scrambled, shame burning in his face, until Anna's hand was suddenly there, pulling him up. "Stay low," she said, her tone clipped but even. "Don't look at your feet, look at your cover." Then she was gone, moving forward again. By the end of the drill, 3rd Platoon had outperformed every other squad. Their cohesion was tight, their maneuvers sharp. And though Lieutenant Davies accepted the praise, every man knew who had carried them through. Thorne knew too, and it hollowed him. From his office, he watched her return with the squad, her face unreadable, her steps steady. She was no longer just part of the unit, she was becoming its center. The soldiers looked at her not with duty, but with something deeper: faith. Thorne slammed his fist against the desk. He couldn't let it continue. He told himself it was about order, about preserving chain of command. But beneath the words, he knew it was about fear. Fear that her shadow had already grown taller than his. So he dug deeper. Late at night, he returned to her sealed file, the red-bordered folder that had become his obsession. Each time he stared at the blacked-out pages, his anger mixed with something colder. What was she hiding? What had she done to make generals send her here to his mountain under his command? The name stared back at him like a ghost: Cassandra. He had laughed at that myth once. The ghost of the North. A phantom who slipped into enemy lines, who survived weeks in hostile terrain with nothing but silence and precision. A story told in whispers. And now in his base, a woman who fit that story stood silent, her eyes gray and empty, her presence bending every man around her. Was it coincidence? Or was the ghost real, standing under his roof, judging him with every breath? The thought kept him awake at night. Meanwhile, Anna continued as if nothing had changed. She trained. She walked. She studied. She guided Tanaka with fragments of wisdom so simple they sounded like riddles. Focus on the next 10 feet, not the mountain. Panic wastes energy. Breathe until it's gone. Weight is pain. Balance is survival. The young private absorbed it all. His fumbling grew into discipline. His weakness hardened into resilience. And slowly, others began to emulate him. Not because she told them to, but because they saw what he was becoming, and they knew it was because of her. The colonel's authority was intact on paper, but in the barracks, in the snow, in the silence of the mountain, the soldiers had found a new center of gravity. And her name was not Anna Voronova, not anymore. It was Cassandra. Why did she move faster than anyone else when the gunfire started? It was supposed to be another drill. Another exercise meant to grind the soldiers against the mountain until their edges were sharp enough to cut. High-altitude navigation, live fire stress simulation, a test of unit cohesion under pressure. Nothing unusual, nothing Anna hadn't seen 100 times already. But drills are only safe until reality decides otherwise. 3rd Platoon had been advancing along a narrow pass, jagged cliffs towering above, when the sound split the air, not blanks, not training fire. Real gunshots, echoing sharp against stone. A mistake, a ricochet from another unit training too close, or perhaps not a mistake at all. No one knew. All they knew was that rounds were snapping overhead, soldiers diving to the ground, chaos threatening to fracture the line. Anna didn't hesitate. She moved before thought, before panic, before the lieutenant's stammered orders. Her stride was low, economical, silent even in the snow. She seized Tanaka by the collar, pulling him out of an exposed position, shoving him behind cover. "Stay down." Her voice was flat, cold. Her eyes swept the cliffs in a single surgical scan. Angles, elevation, lines of sight. Within seconds she had mapped the threat, faster than any man on the ridge. The platoon scrambled, shouting, firing wildly into the rocks. Noise without aim, fear without discipline. Anna didn't fire. She didn't need to. She knew the shooter wasn't targeting them, just a stray or careless discharge from another training lane. But stray bullets kill as surely as deliberate ones. "Cease fire," she barked, her voice cutting through the panic like steel. "Cease fire now." The men froze, stunned at the command in her tone. Even Lieutenant Davies fell silent, his authority drowned by her presence. The mountains answered with one more distant crack, then silence. Anna held still, listening, breath steady. The wind rushed, snow drifted, but no more gunfire came. Slowly, cautiously, she rose. Her movements were predatory, silent, assured, the kind of calm that didn't belong to training grounds but to war zones. She signaled with a hand, precise and sharp. The platoon regrouped. No one spoke. They all felt it. For those few minutes she hadn't been their observer. She had been something else entirely. Back at the base, the incident was written off as a training mishap. A report filed, a reprimand issued to the careless squad. Nothing more. But the men of 3rd Platoon knew different. They had seen her. The way she moved, the way she saw, the way she commanded. And whispers spread louder now. "Cassandra." Tanaka couldn't let it go. That night in the barracks, he leaned toward one of the older sergeants, his voice low. "You saw her. That wasn't logistics. That was." The sergeant cut him off with a look. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." But Tanaka already had the answer, or at least enough of one. She was more than her file, more than her rank, and whatever she had been before, she had carried it here. Colonel Thorne, meanwhile, was unraveling. He had watched the after-action report come in, filled with words like decisive, calm, command presence. Words that should have described him, but they didn't. They described her, always her. Every whisper of Cassandra reached his ears like a knife. He wanted to crush it, to shout it down, but he couldn't. The men believed in her, not in him. At night he pored over her sealed file again, hunting for fragments in the blacked-out text. Commendations for valor, Allied citations, operations in terrain so hostile most men didn't survive a week. Her name buried under code words, her call sign etched in stark clarity. Cassandra, the ghost of the North. The thought made his chest tighten, because if she truly was Cassandra, then what was she doing here? Why had she been sent to his base under his command? He told himself it was coincidence, punishment perhaps, or exile, but another thought, darker, gnawed at him. Maybe she wasn't here for training at all. Maybe she was here to watch him. The paranoia grew. He began to see shadows where there were none. When she walked past his office window, he stiffened, convinced she was listening. When she spoke in that calm, flat tone, he heard accusation under every word. Even when she said nothing, her silence roared in his ears. And yet he couldn't confront her, because if she truly was Cassandra, then he was nothing in comparison. The men had already chosen. Anna herself seemed unchanged. If she noticed the shift, she didn't show it. She drilled. She observed. She gave Tanaka another small fragment of wisdom when he faltered during a night march. Don't chase the horizon, chase the next step. One step at a time, that's how you climb. The words etched into him, carried him forward when his lungs burned and his legs screamed. He clung to them like scripture. But her silence remained. She never told him who she was, never revealed where the lessons came from. It was as if her past was a wall she had built around herself, and all she allowed him were the stones she chose to hand over. The tension grew like a storm on the horizon. The base was changing. Men no longer measured themselves against the colonel's standards. They measured themselves against hers. The myth of Cassandra had taken root, stronger than rank, stronger than authority. And Anna did nothing to stop it. She simply endured, quiet, steady, watching. The mountain was no longer testing her. It was testing everyone else. Why was the call for help rooted to fortitude in the first place? It came just before dawn when the mountains were still black silhouettes against a blood-red horizon. A distress transmission, thin and breaking, patched through command. Not a drill, not an exercise. A real patrol, 4 men conducting reconnaissance near the northern valley, had gone dark. The last words before the line went dead. Contact, small arms requesting. Then nothing but static. The base shifted instantly. This was not training ground bravado anymore. This was the real thing. Colonel Thorne ordered the map lit up, voices overlapping in the command center, officers arguing over terrain, storm conditions, possible enemy presence. It was unlikely, they said. No known hostile groups operated this far into the range, but unlikely didn't bring 4 men back alive. Anna stood at the edge of the room, silent, listening. No one had called her forward. No one had given her orders, but her presence drew eyes. The soldiers waiting in the corners, the sergeants leaning over the map, even Vance, they glanced at her before they glanced at the colonel. Thorne noticed. It made his skin crawl. "3rd platoon will mobilize," he snapped. "Search and recover. Lieutenant Davies has point, no deviations." The words carried authority, but not conviction. Anna's eyes moved to the map. She saw what others missed. The valley narrowed here, funneled the wind, created blind corners. The missing patrol's signal had died near a cluster of ridges that could mask movement. Too easy for an ambush. Too easy for men to disappear. She didn't speak, not yet. But when the room began to disperse, Vance caught her gaze. "Say it," he murmured. Her voice was low, steady. "If they were ambushed, they're not moving. If they're not moving, they're holding a defensive circle, which means they'll be conserving ammo, watching their flanks. The recovery route should sweep the eastern ridge first. It gives line of sight without exposure. Anyone else will walk straight into fire." Thorne's head snapped toward her, face flushed. "You are not in command here, Captain. You are an observer. Do not presume to." But Vance cut in, his voice like gravel. "She's right." The silence that followed was louder than the colonel's anger. Hours later, the recovery team deployed. Snowmobiles chewed across frozen valleys, rifles strapped, eyes scanning the ridgelines. Lieutenant Davies rode at the front, young jaw clenched, trying not to show nerves. Behind him, Tanaka adjusted his gear, heart hammering. And at the rear, Anna, not by order but by decision. She had strapped in with the others, her face impassive, her movements efficient. No one questioned it. They reached the narrowing pass by mid-morning. The sky had turned steel gray, the wind carrying snow like shards of glass. Every sound was amplified. The creak of gear, the crunch of boots, the thin whistle of the wind cutting through rock. Then they saw it. A flare, weak and sputtering, fired from behind a low ridge. Not training issue, emergency. Davies signaled the platoon forward. Weapons raised, men spread into formation. Tension crackled through the air. Anna scanned the terrain, her eyes narrowing. Too quiet, too still. She felt it before she saw it, the unnatural rhythm of the snow disturbed, the shadow of movement against stone. "Cover," she barked. The first gunshot cracked a second later. Real, close, echoing sharp. Bullets tore through snow, kicking up white plumes. Men dove behind rocks, rifles returning fire. Tanaka's heart stopped. His first real firefight, not blanks, not noise, death screaming through the air. His breath came fast, panic rising until he heard her. "Breathe 4 in, hold 6 out." Her voice calm in the chaos. He forced his lungs to obey. The world steadied. Anna was already moving, sliding low along the ridge, her rifle braced, eyes unblinking. Her shots were precise, deliberate, one at a time, each crack answered by silence as shadows dropped behind the rocks. The platoon regrouped under her calm. Where Davies shouted orders, Anna gave direction in a tone so even it seemed to slow time. "Shift left, watch the ridge. 2 o'clock, wait now. Cover your sector, no waste." And the men obeyed, not because of rank, because of survival. Minutes stretched into eternity, then finally silence. No more shots, only the wind. They advanced cautiously, weapons ready, until they reached the flare's origin. There, huddled behind the ridge, 3 of the missing patrol, frostbitten, exhausted, one bleeding from a shoulder wound. Alive. The 4th was farther down, motionless in the snow, gone. Tanaka swallowed hard, staring at the still form, the blood against white. His first body. The weight of it pressed into his chest, heavier than his pack. He wanted to look away. Couldn't. Anna crouched beside the fallen man, her gloved hand brushing the frost from his face. She didn't speak, didn't pray, just closed his eyes gently, a small act of dignity in the cold. Then she stood. "Load the wounded, we move." Her voice gave no room for grief. Not now. The return was slower, burdened by sleds carrying the wounded and the dead. But they made it. When they passed through the gates of Fortitude Base, the crowd was waiting again. Fewer cheers this time, more silence, respect. The 3 survivors were carried to medical. The body was borne away, draped in a thermal sheet. And Anna, she stood aside, her face unreadable, her uniform streaked with snow and blood. Colonel Thorne was there, jaw tight, eyes flicking between her and the returning soldiers. They didn't look at him. They looked at her. He felt it like a knife. That night, as the mess hall filled with the low hum of weary voices, Tanaka sat at her table again. His hands trembled as he lifted his tray. "I froze, ma'am," he admitted. "When the shots started, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move." She looked at him, gray eyes steady. "And yet you did, you're here." "I only because of you," his voice cracked. Anna shook her head. "No, because you chose, fear doesn't vanish. You silence it, step by step, breath by breath. The choice is always yours." Tanaka swallowed, the weight of her words pressing into him like the mountain itself. Across the hall, Thorne watched, silent, his knuckles white around a glass. He couldn't deny it anymore. She was Cassandra. Whether myth or truth, she stood in his base, commanding without command, leading without asking. And his soldiers, his men, followed her with a loyalty he had never earned. The colonel lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling, haunted by a question he could not silence. Why had she really been sent here? Why did Colonel Thorne begin locking his office door, even when no one knocked? The paranoia had grown claws. Every time he heard her boots in the corridor, every time he glimpsed her shadow passing his window, he felt the walls of his authority pressing tighter. He had been a colonel for years, built his career on order, discipline, command presence. But now the men looked at her, not him. He had thought respect was something earned with rank. He had thought fear kept soldiers in line. But Anna Voronova, Cassandra, had dismantled that belief without ever raising her voice. She moved with quiet certainty, and the men bent toward her like frost bending pine needles. He saw it everywhere. At the range, when Tanaka mirrored her breathing. In the mess hall, when sergeants leaned in to catch her clipped instructions. On patrol, when squads straightened their formations if they even thought she was watching. It ate at him, it hollowed him. The worst part was that she never seemed to notice. Or worse, she noticed and simply didn't care. He told himself he would not be undone by silence. So he began digging. Late nights he summoned reports, demanded sealed files, pulled on threads that were never meant to be touched. Every door he opened was another wall of black ink, redactions, code names, citations from places he had only heard of in rumors, operations without coordinates, missions without witnesses. And always the same call sign, Cassandra. It was no longer a rumor, no longer a myth. She was here in his command, and no matter how he tried to bury the truth, the mountain itself seemed to whisper her name. The soldiers had already accepted it. Tanaka most of all. The young private carried her lessons like scripture now. Each morning he breathed in fours and out in sixes. Each march he counted steps instead of staring at peaks. Each time fear tightened his chest, he remembered her words. Calm is a choice. Panic is noise. He didn't see her as human anymore. Not really. She was something else, a standard no one could reach, but one he would die trying to follow. That frightened him sometimes in the quiet hours before sleep. Because if she was more than human, what did that make him? What did it make any of them? The next crisis struck without warning. Not enemy fire this time. Not a storm, something closer. A training exercise on the western slopes went wrong, a rock slide triggered by explosives buried in unstable snow. 2 squads were cut off, pinned in a canyon, their exit blocked by tons of jagged ice and rock. The comms barely carried their voices, thin with panic, air already thinning in the narrow gorge. Colonel Thorne convened his staff, his voice sharp, commanding urgency. We'll wait for engineering crews. Clear the debris systematically. It's too dangerous to send men into that gorge. We don't know if the rest of the slope will hold. It was protocol, logical, safe. But the trapped squads didn't have that kind of time. Anna stood at the edge of the room again, her silence heavier than the colonel's orders. The soldiers shifted uneasily, eyes flicking between the two. Finally Vance spoke. They won't last until the engineers get there. They need air, they need extraction, now. Thorne bristled. And what would you suggest, Sergeant Major, that we send more men into a death trap, risk 20 to save 10? Vance didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward Anna. The colonel saw it, felt it, his jaw clenched. Don't you dare, he hissed, pointing at her. Don't you dare undermine me in front of my command. Anna's voice cut the room like a blade. We don't need 20. The silence that followed was suffocating. She stepped closer to the map, her gray eyes sweeping the terrain lines. The gorge narrows here. The debris field is unstable, but there's an old shepherd's path along the ridge, steep but traversable. 2 climbers with ropes could descend, anchor a line, and pull them up one at a time. It avoids the collapse zone. Her tone was flat, factual, as if the solution were obvious. Thorne's face went scarlet. Absolutely not. It's reckless. It's insane. You think you can gamble men's lives on some shepherd's trail you memorized from a map. Anna looked at him, expression unchanging. It isn't a gamble. The words weren't defiant. They were worse. They were certain. Within an hour, the decision was made, not because Thorne ordered it, but because the soldiers began preparing ropes and gear under Vance's direction. No one said it aloud, but they were following her plan. Anna and Tanaka were among the first to climb. The path was brutal, ice-crusted rock, sheer drops, wind tearing at their bodies. Tanaka's hands trembled on the rope, breath ragged, but Anna's voice anchored him again. Focus on the next hold, not the fall, one grip at a time. When they reached the ledge above the gorge, the trapped soldiers looked up with disbelief. Faces pale, eyes wide, they saw her silhouette framed against the sky, rope coiled over her shoulder like salvation. The extraction was slow, grueling, every pull against the line a battle of muscle and will. Tanaka bled from his palms, but he didn't stop, not with her above him. One by one, the soldiers rose out of the gorge, coughing, shivering, alive. When the last man reached the ridge, Anna didn't climb up immediately. She waited, scanning the slope, her eyes calculating as if she expected another collapse. Only when she was certain did she ascend, movements precise, silent as always. The base erupted when the rescued squads returned, not with cheers, but with the same stunned silence that had followed the storm rescue, silence heavier than words. And in that silence, the whispers grew louder. "Cassandra, Cassandra, Cassandra." Thorn heard it echoing down every hallway, bleeding through every wall. It haunted him. He could no longer tell if they spoke it as a name or a prayer. That night he drank alone in his office, staring at her file again, the black lines mocking him. Who was she really? Why had she been sent here? And how much longer could he remain in command when his men had already chosen their leader in silence? For the first time in his career, Colonel Thorn understood what it meant to be truly afraid. Not of the mountain, not of the enemy, but of one of his own. Why did she stay silent, even when the truth was dragged into the light? The mountain had grown quiet again. Weeks passed without storms, without gunfire, without rock slides. The base returned to its rhythms, drills, mess hall chatter, maintenance runs. On the surface, fortitude seemed unchanged, but beneath, nothing was the same. Because now, when soldiers spoke of endurance, they measured themselves against her. When they whispered about leadership, it was her name they carried like a secret oath: Cassandra. The colonel's authority was still intact on paper, but everyone knew paper tore easily. Thorn felt it pressing on him every waking hour. He had spent his career building control, and now his commands slipped through his fingers like meltwater in spring. Every time he gave an order, he wondered if they obeyed him, or if they obeyed her. He tried to assert himself. More drills, harsher punishments, barked commands. But each time the soldiers turned their eyes to her, even unconsciously. They didn't question him out loud. They didn't rebel, but they measured his words against her silence, and his words were always found wanting. It ate him alive. So he pushed further into her file. He demanded clearances, called in favors, pulled threads that had been buried deep for a reason. And finally, one night long after the barracks had gone still, a packet arrived on his desk. Not the redacted scraps he had seen before, not the whispers of myth, but fragments of truth. Photographs, grainy and cold, of a woman standing in snow, weapon slung low, eyes gray and empty. Reports of missions with no coordinates, only code words: extraction successful, target secured, no survivors left behind. Awards granted in secret ceremonies, sealed under classifications higher than his pay grade. And at the center of it all, the name Cassandra. The ghost of the North. She had been real all along. Not a story, not a rumor, and she had been sent here, to his base, to his command. Why? The question hollowed him. The next morning, he summoned her. She stood in his office, back straight, expression calm, the jagged peaks behind her framed in the glass. He held the file in his hands like a weapon. "I know who you are," he said. His voice was unsteady, trembling with anger, with fear. "Cassandra, the ghost, the one they whisper about." Anna's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to him. Her face remained unreadable. "And yet," she said softly, "you still don't know me." The words cut deeper than any confession. Thorn slammed the file onto the desk, papers scattering. "Why are you here? Why send you to me, to my base? What are you watching for? What are you waiting for?" She didn't answer. Her silence broke him more than any truth would have, because silence meant she didn't need to justify herself. Silence meant she had already won. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rattling faintly against the window. Finally she spoke. "I didn't come here for you, Colonel. I came here for them." She turned, leaving him trembling in his office, his authority crumbling in the weight of her calm. That afternoon, the soldiers saw something no one expected. Colonel Thorne left his quarters, walked into the open yard, and called the company to formation. His voice carried, but it was hollow. He gave orders, recited procedures, spoke words that landed without weight. And then, when Anna walked past on the far side of the formation, his eyes followed her, and for the briefest moment his shoulders slumped. It was the posture of a man who realized he had already been replaced. That night Tanaka sat across from Anna in the mess hall. He hesitated, fork in hand, eyes restless. Finally, he said what had burned in him since the firefight. "Ma'am, why do they call you Cassandra?" Her gaze lifted slowly, gray eyes steady on his. He braced for an answer, a revelation, a story that would pierce the silence. But all she said was, "It doesn't matter." Then she returned to her meal. And in that moment, Tanaka understood. It wasn't about titles, it wasn't about myths. It was about choices, about breath after breath, step after step, about calm carved from chaos. He didn't need the story, he already had the lesson. Weeks later, on the rifle range at dawn, he lay beside her again. Their breaths matched, their rifles steady, their silence complete. When the shots cracked, brass casings fell in rhythm, 2 arcs of gold landing softly in the snow. Sergeant Major Vance passed by, his boots crunching in the frost. He paused, watching them, the legend and the apprentice, the ghost and the believer. He nodded once to Anna. She returned it, almost imperceptible. Then she exhaled, slow and steady, her finger tightening on the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing off the silent mountains. A perfect hit. No one cheered, no one needed to, because her presence had already become the measure. The officer had said she wouldn't last. But she had endured the mountain. She had endured their doubt. She had endured their silence and turned it into something stronger than rank or fear. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.